Hello, and welcome to another episode with Interview At, where you're going to learn how to use the Amazon leadership principles to land any job at any company at any level with a lot less stress. My name is Brandon Watson. I'm an ex-executive from Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, as well as a handful of startups where I spent the better part of the first few decades of my career as a executive in product management. You know all those questions that start with, tell me about a time when? Well, those are behavioral interview questions, and they've become a mainstay of most interviews, well, specifically interviews which are not technical. And when I was going through the process of interviewing for chief product officer roles and vice president of product management roles, things of that nature, I came up with a secret prep hack so that I could save time and, quite frankly, stress levels. And it turns out it worked no matter the role and no matter the company, because I stopped trying to answer every question I might get asked and instead prepared in a different way. My secret was discovering that I could map literally any of those questions to at least one Amazon leadership principle. Doing this allowed me to focus on story prep and not question prep. If you don't believe me, I challenge you, go ahead and submit any question down below in the comments that is one of those behavioral type questions, and I will map it to at least one leadership principle. In these videos, I break down the mock interviews, which I've conducted at Interview At for candidates looking to increase their chances of landing their dream job. The leadership principles are a great way to deliver feedback on how they have answered their questions and a great way for you to prepare for your interviews. Today's candidate was targeting a tech industry company. We'll call it in the fintech space. Definitely early in their career in a biz dev / sales role. The specific segment of this mock interview is on delivers results. The question I used in this interview was, in any of your roles, walk me through a situation where you were able to considerably exceed expectations. What was the situation and how did you overachieve? Now, it's patently obvious from the outset that this is deliver results because it literally says, tell me about a time when you basically delivered results. So this is a common question, right? Anyone who's interviewing you wants to know how good you are, and it's very much detail and delivery oriented, a results oriented question. I did actually, these interviews, I block out the candidate so that it's, using the mosaic blur in post-production so that they, their identity could be hidden. But I do get emails from folks from time to time when they've landed their dream job. They're nice enough to reach back out and let me know what happened. And this candidate did send me an email. I've snipped a few sentences here. I'm delighted to inform you that after several interviews with company, I was provided an employment offer to join as a senior account executive. Very excited to hear that, of course. I love getting these emails. I used the tips you shared and I nailed it! Exclamation point. I do like the exclamation points as well. Thanks again for your guidance and support. So really cool to get those notes. People just like you, folks at all levels, various different companies coming with various different levels of experience come to me, and when they get through the mock interview process, they realize their preparation wasn't kind of where they wanted. That's why we do the mock interviews. But they also learn a few things that I've learned over the years that dramatically reduces the stress, dramatically improves their likelihood of success just in terms of how they're preparing for the interview. So if you're finding this content valuable, please like and subscribe because it lets YouTube know that I'm doing a good job for people like you. If you want a mock interview conducted by me, please feel free to visit interviewout.com. Schedule's a bit full right now. It's summertime, kids going back to school, etc. But I do my best, and if you show moxie and just email me, I've been known to move my calendar around just a bit since this is not my primary job. All right, here we go into the chalk talk discussion of this interview. And as always, my feedback is done real time. I don't do these cuts, just like your interviews. It would seem unfair to have do-overs. So we're going to watch the interview together. I will intersperse my commentary as we go. What was I thinking during the interview? Why did I ask a question? What did the candidate do right or wrong at a given point? Just kind of jump in and out. And then at the end, kind of give you the evaluation that was provided in the candidate assessment. So with that, let's jump in to our candidate for a sales / BD role. And the leadership principle was deliver results. This one is, kind of take a victory lap, I guess, versus the earlier question. This is specifically about a time when you considerably exceeded expectations, right? Not that you held the line on getting a better outcome, but that you exceeded expectations. Just let's talk about the situation and what was it and how did you overachieve? Now, before you even get started, I'm going to jump in here. Notice how I framed the question. And I said, take a bit of a victory lap. That was me as an interviewer trying to put him a bit at ease. This was the sixth question. We go through 6 leadership principles generally in a mock interview. This was the 6th question. So it was the end of the interview, end of the hour. He's already had a rough kind of time here. Mock interviews, any interview is always stressful. But this was me kind of giving him the opportunity to feel a bit more comfortable and brag a bit. Sometimes interviewers will do this, sometimes they won't, but that's just something to listen to when it happens.
I think with the American Association of Aesthetic Medicine and Surgery, when I got there, the company was not what it is when I left. Not just due to my efforts, but due to ideas and new concepts. And I think the expectation was always to just sell a certain amount of products or services, right? And get a certain amount of results. And it was very traditional. You pitch, you play, you pitch, you play, you go. What I started to create was opportunities for partnerships. How did I do that? Was instead of taking the software and selling it to a physician or his practice, I was able to take an idea where you have multiple clinics, share licenses amongst them, and then outside of the marketplace, they can relicense the software and get a percentage.
So I'm going to jump in here real quick. Something you always need to consider as a candidate when you're doing your interview. Assume nothing. Do not assume that the interviewer knows anything about your company, anything about your product or service, anything about anything that you've done. This candidate, in kind of setting up their answer, it's specific enough that someone who worked with him would know what he was talking about. But when you think about the cognitive load that you might be putting on an interviewer when you're walking through something, they're trying to figure out what are they talking about? What does this really mean? Are they using language or concepts that are foreign to me? Like, assume nothing. And hopefully throughout the course of your interview, whether you're with them 45 minutes to an hour, the interviewer has provided feedback as to what altitude they're looking to fly at, and they've asked some clarifying questions so you should have a better understanding of this. But here we are, even in the last question, and it's still, the answer is being framed in a way that is a little bit difficult to follow because I'm not really sure what he's talking about because I didn't live it every day. And so that's just something you have to be careful of when you're doing an interview is being too comfortable in your own answer and talking in a way that it would make sense because you lived it every day, but maybe not to someone who's hearing it for the first time.
So that mindset for me came from reading about licensing, reading about expanding, so on and so forth. The company wasn't thinking about that.
So just a quick jump in here. Really love how he tagged this answer with a little bit of learn and be curious. Pretty cool.
They were always hoping to get groups, just groups, mini hospitals, clinic groups, multi-specialty. For me, I said, okay, what if we get markets instead of groups? Marketplaces where you can have somebody who's responsible for reissuing these licenses for this educational software. We're controlling it and managing it with the brand, and we're putting the members in, but in return, we're giving them a share. So I actually presented this idea to one individual in the Middle East, which was in Beirut, Lebanon. And they were so into the idea and they were so networked and connected by luck. I didn't know how much bigger this deal was. I knew there was something there, but I didn't think it was that big. They ended up getting 3 other partners, Egypt, Bahrain, and Dubai. So it became the Middle Eastern group market where I was able to put this proposal together where all 4 would each have their own individual market, share the brand name. We created a landing page website for them so that they can drive the business there. They did all the marketing. So I was ultimately able to open a whole new market. That was a phenomenal deal for me, not because I'm trying to.
So you're watching this interview with me. Obviously, I conducted the interview, but you're watching it for the first time. Is it clear to you what the candidate did? Do you really understand what they did? Other than some high-level topics, is it clear to you what they did? Because if it's not, you're not alone. I would say the level of detail here is a bit missing, but let's keep going.
My own horn, but because it enabled the company to think beyond the way that we were doing it and bring in. And we also got a Mexico deal similar and a Latin America deal similar thereafter. So I did kind of open the door to a new way of doing business. And it took me 7 months to close the deal, but it yielded results that were worth the 7 months plus all of the additional business that came from this business model.
What was the deal structure? Why was it different? What were the results? What were the numbers? How did the numbers shake out? How much money did they make? Why was this better? How much time did it take to close? How was this better? All of these details are missing and lacking.
And I was I tell you what, I was very proud of myself because I researched. I spent hours before work and after on how to structure these deals, hours of the phone, different time zones. I really was proud of myself because I came together and made it work. And that for me was like one of the biggest accomplishments I've ever had.
But where is the detail? Need detail. Whenever you're going to talk about things you've done, you must be prepared to give details.
Something that was, traditionally a sale into a completely different market. And I think that was one of my biggest accomplishments there.
So what challenges did you have to overcome in order to accomplish this?
So that question right there from me was kind of all right, but what did you really do here, right? You did a new thing, fine, but you considerably exceeded your expectations. What was the challenge? Like, what got in the way? Why was this a big deal? What is it that you did that was important, but why was this a big deal and why should anyone care is kind of the net of what that follow-up question was. But it's also my way of saying, like, okay, but what did you really do here?
Working with 4 groups, each one has an opinion, each one has their marketplace, each one has their concerns, and then managing them all, putting them all on one particular page, right, where we can all work together. There was multiple WhatsApp groups. We had to do so many I had to have a communication strategy in place, just a structure for communication just for that.
Ask yourself, could you replicate even at a high level what he did? If your answer doesn't provide that level of detail where someone walking out of the room could see, kind of envision a reasonably seasoned or talented person in your field, couldn't like think, oh, that's interesting, I could probably duplicate that if they can't have that conversation with themselves, you fail to deliver on the details. And that's kind of important if you want to stand out in an interview loop.
And then the back and forth, you got 4 contracts, 4 agreements on the table and 1 master agreement. So dealing with the differences in opinions for those, the marketing price. I mean, there was a lot of obstacles along the way. There was a lot of hiccups, and there was a lot of things that needed to be created that weren't there. So I had to further and research, and so the challenges came as they came.
Notice how many times the candidate says there was a lot of this, there was a lot of that, there was a lot of things we needed created, but doesn't actually give the details. And I keep harping on this word: details, 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 details.
And I think that was part of what was so rewarding, is to overcome those challenges. But I still believe that it's always the first deal when the first time that you have all of these things go on, but then second after, next deal is going to be a lot easier because you have the template, you have the mistakes, you have all the lessons learned, everything you have to work off of.
And so what alternatives, as you were working through this process, what alternatives did you consider and then ultimately reject?
Let's talk about this follow-up question. As a leader at any level in any organization, sure, go with your gut. Obviously, sometimes that works. But being a thoughtful leader means I thought through a few alternatives and I was able to reject some of them out of hand. I was able to reject others because we looked into them and it didn't meet these criteria. That's what this question's getting at. It's, did this person understand why they made the decision they made? Did they get lucky? Did they just shoot from the hip and do something and it worked out? Do they even understand? Were they successful? Like, how is this repeatable? But also, do you even know what your success metrics were ahead of time, thereby allowing you to have a conversation with your leadership as to whether or not you actually performed well or not?
Alternatives in regards to the actual deal itself?
Yeah. How to accomplish the same goal, but do it slightly differently.
Oh, I think if I had partnered with somebody in the Middle Eastern region, if I had partnered with someone to really help with the deal itself, to serve kind of a liaison between them, to be a foot on the ground, I think that would have been a tremendous help. I think that would have been something that would have expedited the entire deal and would have probably put a lot more fires out than I had to on my own.
Have you heard any details? Details, details, details. The details are important. Why though? Why would it have been important? Why? What are the details? Back up your answer, please.
So I think partnering in that sense, finding someone that can help and step in and give them a percentage for their efforts would have been the smarter way to go. But I couldn't trust that at that time. I didn't know what exactly I was looking for. I was creating as I go. But definitely having that alternative to get more support locally would have been big.
Okay. And so when you consider the outcomes from this work experience, what is the most significant learning? And what I mean by that is, what would you bring to the table in like a future role? Like, what is the key takeaway that you'd be happy to, share with a new team? Like, hey, I did this, I did that. Like, what was the key takeaway that would be repeatable in a new role?
I think expanding on the role. I mean, that's what I did with the triple AMS. We call it the triple AMS is the acronym. Expanding on the role. So if I'm expected to do a list of accomplishments or tasks, and I can find an additional set of tasks that provide a completely different outcome, I would do that. So for me, if I could find creative ways to do business, to create more value out of our company, to provide more resources out of this effort to both the team and the client, that's what I'd do. I'd use that example, thinking outside of the box with the triple AMS, is finding, instead of clients, finding new marketplace. So I would like to utilize the experience I've had there. I would love to think that you can have alternative ways of doing business that achieve the same results, if not better. And I would try to really find those small little gaps to be filled with big outcomes. As I had mentioned, that's what I did there. And I think that would be something that I would probably want to contribute to. Uh, I just don't want to be your traditional salesperson doing their thing. I really want to put in different ideas that we can approach to start creating different ways of doing business, that methods that have results as well.
You know that part where I said I was going to do this as one shot? There's a guy out there, he was sawing stuff, so I muted my microphone, and the whole final part of my evaluation here was muted. It's always fun when you discover that when you're getting ready to push the video out. It's good times. All right, well, a watchword of this interview was details, details, details. And when I look back at the feedback that was delivered to this candidate for this specific leadership principle, it's important to understand, overall, I think he did okay across the whole of the interview. In this specific answer, there was, quite honestly, a lack of detail, right? And what I said was, for delivers results specifically, candidate ultimately failed to demonstrate how their actions and the specificity of their actions, how that led to great results, and more specifically, what those results were. The lack of details surrounding this answer made it very difficult to know what was accomplished via process initiated by the candidate, put in place by the candidate, and by accident. So when you think about the leadership principles as a way to deliver your answer, you've heard me say, and I will continue to just pound the table, it's about story preparation, not answer preparation, not question preparation. What I mean by that is, if you try to imagine all of the questions you might get asked, it gets very easy to put yourself into that mode of you're memorizing answers and then you don't deliver them well, or any number of things that can happen, right? When you think about story preparation, it's more tied to being able to comfortably relate a thing that happened to you and do so in a way that feels natural. So when you think about an interview, one of the calming things I tell people to think about is, don't think about it as I'm interviewing on the other side of the table, video, whatever, with someone who I'm trying to convince to hire me. That's a high stress situation. But rather, you're going out to lunch with someone that you now work with, and they're going to ask you a bunch of stuff about what you did at your last job, and you're just going to tell them about it. Right? Because if you go into it with the mindset that you already work together, one, that calms you down, but two, now you're just talking about stuff you've already done. And you want them to walk out of that lunch saying, wow, I'm really glad we hired that person, right? So in thinking about how to leverage the leadership principles from Amazon to deliver better answers, instead of trying to think through every possible question you might get asked, when you recognize a question as, oh, that's a delivers results question, this person really wants to know that I can deliver, right? What are logical questions you might get asked above and beyond just tell me about a time you exceeded expectations? What were the expectations and how did you exceed them? That's kind of table stakes. How did those metrics get set? Did you set them or did someone else set them? How do you know you were successful? Did you deliver above and beyond by a lot, a little? Like, give me kind of grades of success or failure. Who helped you in this process? Who got in the way in this process? Did you have to invent a new process or routine or something that helped you get there, right? There's a lot of questions you can ask yourself as part of a story preparation so that you can get comfortable telling the story over and over again. And that if you get asked those questions as follow-ups or even answer them, kind of you're giving freebies away to the interviewer. You're saying, hey, listen, something that I wanted to focus on was we had this kind of monster obstacle that was in front of us that no one really wanted to talk about, but this kind of got in the way of our ability to accomplish this goal and had historically stood in the way. You've now given them a freebie question, which is, well, what was in the way of you accomplishing this goal, right? So the reason I harp on storytelling so much is when you think about how you're going to go into an interview, I've said, would you rather tell a story to someone you feel comfortable talking to or do improv on a stage for an audience of 8 times in an hour? It's super stress inducing, right? Don't want to go down that path. Ask me the story about how I met my wife. 1,000 monkeys, 1,000 keyboards. They're all going to basically tell the same story because I've told that story so many times. It doesn't matter who I'm talking to. Everybody who's heard the story knows the story, the general story. But depending on who I'm talking to, I might tag the story with like different funny bits that are relevant to the people she works with now, or she's trying to project this air of like, super executive type powerhouse versus, people she went to high school with who really understand some of the challenges that she overcame from her socioeconomic background that she may not appreciate me bringing up in a different environment. And so when you have the comfort with the story, you're able to, one, pause, jump ahead, move around, tell it non-linearly as needed. You can get interrupted with follow-up questions, clarifying questions. It's not going to rattle you. And depending on who you're talking to, it's delivers results question. That's what this one is. Delivers results. He's going for a sale or BD role. Okay. If he's talking to another salesperson, he's going to want to know, not only do you deliver results, how do you earn trust inside the organization, outside of the organization? Right? Did you have to think big to come up with a solution here that, really wowed a bunch of people, right? Being able to tag your story with additional leadership principles. I'm not talking about going off on some random tangent, but a couple of sentences even. It increases your standing. It makes your presence that much bigger. And in some cases, we call this executive presence, but you're telling the story, you're relating it in a way that helps the person who's listening to you understand how you're going to bring that to their company. Is it repeatable? Can you do it again? Do you understand what you did and why and where it went wrong and how to fix those sorts of things? It's okay to admit to mistakes if you understand what they are and can talk about them and how you fixed them, right? But in telling that story now, you're having a back and forth versus a full-on panic attack because I totally forgot about that one part that I wrote in the sentence that I wrote down in my file, and I see it happen all the time. I see the engine seize up. I see the wheels come off when people are trying to go through memorized answers. And that's just setting yourself up for failure rather than breaking down the role that you're going for into the leadership principles that probably most likely matter, focusing on those for your story development, and then having kind of, the tertiary leadership principles that don't necessarily matter for your role, but just kind of being prepared to have at least 1 or 2 stories in your back pocket ready to go. More than anything, it's about comfort with the story, comfort with being able to tell it, and then delivering in a way that's going to answer the obvious follow-on questions, whether you do it on your own or allow those questions to come. And in this case, give me a time where you considerably exceed expectations. Base table stakes. What were the expectations? Give me numbers, something. How did you exceed them? By how much? Magnitude of overachieve, right? How did you get there? What was so hard about getting there? When you thought about all the things you had to do to get there, what did you consider and reject, and why? These are all things that you are likely to get asked, and if you get a lazy interviewer, you will not get asked. And if you don't get asked those questions, now you're leaving it to the judges. You've basically relied on the interviewer to ask you the right questions so that you can portray your answer the right way, but they're going to come out of that interview thinking, wow, that person really wasn't that great. Their communication style was not that great. They weren't very detail-oriented, and just not a great hire. But if you had the content ready to go, why not share it, right? And you can do this by just going a little bit long and answering the question. You can say, hey, I know I've talked a lot about this, but one of the funny things about how all this went down, we had this huge obstacle in the way that we all laugh about now. I'm happy to talk about that. Again, you're giving them a freebie question. They might say, no, I'm not interested in that. I'd actually like to know more about blah. Great. Now they've kind of given you direction where they want you to go. Perfect. You're now having rapport and you're endearing yourself to the person that you're sitting on the opposite side of. But if you have someone who's come in, who's totally unprepared, hasn't even looked at your interview, and you say, we had this really big obstacle that I'm happy to talk about, then they go, yeah, tell me about the obstacles that you overcame. You just made their day so much easier, right? You made their job easier. Great. These are all good things. So candidate, ultimately landed the job, as we talked about at the front end of this. So that's great. So the feedback that he got from Interview At was helpful. But understand, we do the mock interviews so we can figure out where we are in terms of our ability to represent ourselves and ultimately reach higher and get our dream jobs.